This is episode 764 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing, president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. I am very pleased to be joined by former Las Cruces mayor and current candidate for the Democratic nomination for governor, Ken Miyagishima. Welcome to Tipping Point, New Mexico, Ken.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Good morning to you and Wally and your listeners. And today's Veterans Day, so happy Veterans Day to our veterans out there. So if they come across one, please tell them they're very much appreciated today and every day, really.
Absolutely. And thank you for that. And thank you for dropping by to come and talk to us a little bit about your campaign for governor. But before we get into that, you were the mayor of Las Cruces, and was that your first foray into public office? And if so, what made you decide to run for mayor of Las Cruces?
No, my first foray into politics was when I was about 8 or 9 years old. But my first race that I ran was in 1990. Excuse me. I ran against a fellow by the name of Lee Rawson. He was a state rep, and I lived in District 37 back then. I guess technically I still live in District 37, but he was a state rep. And I just wanted to serve, did everything I could, came close. I took 49.5%, lost by 320 votes. And then 2 years later, I ran for county commissioner in 1992. I was fortunate to get elected to that. And then reelected in 96. Was termed out in 2000. And then in 2001, I ran for city council, District 6, and was fortunate to win that. And then in 2005, I got a free ride. It was unopposed. And then in 2007 is when I was elected mayor. I was elected by 74 votes. The mayor asked for a recount. I picked up 6 more, officially won by 80. And then subsequently reelected in 2011, 2015, 2019, which was the first time we used ranked choice voting. And then I knew I wanted to run for governor, so I didn't want to run again in 2023, assuming that I won. It would be really a challenge to be mayor and then run for a statewide office.
So what was your governing philosophy as mayor of Las Cruces, and what were some of your accomplishments that you're most proud of?
So unlike Albuquerque and Santa Fe, the mayor we divert the power to the city manager. And so the council and we would hire the manager and then they would run the day-to-day operations. The charter allowed me to set the policy, and it was up to me to convince my council members that this was the policy to take. So we had a great council. We really did. Towards the end, it got a little bit different because it was loaded up with a little bit of council members that I didn't always necessarily see eye to eye with, as far as they're good people, don't get me wrong, but some of their philosophies and mine didn't quite mesh. But we were able to accomplish many things throughout all those years. Excuse me. We built a brand new city hall, which is cost neutral. I mean, actually the money we were spending on the old city hall equated to what we were spending on the new city hall because it was so cost efficient, energy efficient. We built a convention center, Las Cruces Convention Center, which was really a great addition. We were able to build the aquatic center there in Las Cruces, and then actually right before I left, another Olympic-sized swimming pool. So that worked out great. We've added many different types of parks and recreation, walking paths, literally a loop around the whole city, which is really great. Sports complex. One of the things that I really enjoyed, I started a program in 2008 with third graders and went all the way up to COVID, to 2020. And it was about, education, nutrition, and it was fun. I really enjoyed that, and I had a blast doing that. And so we were able to help move our graduation rates to the point where our graduation rates in Las Cruces was the highest in the state. I don't know what it is today, but I know that at that time it was.
Now, interestingly enough, according to a recent report from the Department of Workforce Solutions, July 2019 to July 2024. Doña Ana County, of course, Las Cruces is by far and away the biggest city in Doña Ana County. That was the fastest growing numerically population county in New Mexico. Sandoval County, of course, Rio Rancho, that area. The counties are more than just the cities they are in, but the cities probably do, in both cases, drive population growth. But we're going to talk a little bit about housing later on in this conversation. But do you think there's some specific ways or tools that you've used in Las Cruces to allow that city to grow that could be important, while you're running for governor, that things that you've leveraged that can also help the state grow?
So what we did in Las Cruces, excuse me, was basically we had to restructure some things because when I defeated the former mayor, our growth was at 6% per year. That was extremely too high, and in fact, there was a time where some other cities around the country were growing that fast, and then it just fell apart. So we had to kind of slow things down a little bit, get a few things in place, and then I remember one of my state of the city addresses. I said, "Okay, we're ready to take off," and we did. And because before developers were just the medians weren't being paid, weren't being landscaped. There was no connectability. Developers, when they were giving land away, they were giving land to the schools in flood zones. I mean, it just wasn't right. We had to kind of stop this and get on the right track, and we did. And I had good council members who supported me, and we just forged ahead.
All right. Well,
but as far as housing for the state,
sure.
So, and thank you for letting me. First off, thank you for letting me be here. It's like being invited to the Jay Leno show. Okay. So, but one of the things that when you're building homes, there's going to be two things that are, of course, the price of the materials and labor. And so, before I left being mayor, I remember going to a graduation at Southern New Mexico Correctional Facility. So this is a medium security. These are people who primarily nonviolent. I mean, they didn't kill anyone or rape anyone or anything with children. So what I was thinking was if we could somehow, let's say we have someone here is in jail for 5 years and they've served 3 years and they've been a fairly good prisoner and they have 2 more years to go. If they want to, we can pull them out, teach them a trade like plumbing, electrical, HVAC, heating, firefighting, and allow them to work with get these public-private partnerships with contractors, if they choose to, and then that way that will be our contribution. They'll learn a trade. The cost of the construction of the home should be a lot less, about 25% less. Contractors still make their money. We're not here to try to replace them. We're just trying to use this type of labor, give them an opportunity to learn something. And then once they finish their term, they can continue to work for this employer, contractor, and hopefully be able to reintegrate themselves back into society, reduce our recidivism rate, and be able to provide housing. And I think I have it down in different phases. So, but phase 1 was primarily be used to help as an incentive to bring in police officers from other states. I don't want to take them from other cities because then we're depleting, we're cannibalizing off one department to help another one here in New Mexico. I would prefer to get them from Arizona, Colorado, Utah, Texas.
All right. Well, why are you running for governor? What, as a Democrat in a 3-person primary? I think that's probably the candidates that we have, or the candidates that we'll have in June when the primary happens. But what are your reasons for running for governor?
So one of the things, and I need to quit be not so modest about it, but the city of Las Cruces, like I said, we had a great team. We were ranked best run city in the state 8 years in a row. And there was a time where 7 years in a row, we were ranked in the top 10 in the nation. And a lot of times the Albuquerque Journal wouldn't cover it, the Santa Fe New Mexican wouldn't cover it, so you probably never had heard that. So we have a lot of great things going on in Las Cruces. And so what I want to do is I want to be as a resource, my team to any city or county in New Mexico. I think we can help. Whether it's for example, I was in Las Vegas, New Mexico, and they were dealing with some of the issues from the fire. We're pretty good when it comes to flood control. We're pretty good when it comes to coming up with ideas to work with FEMA. And so that would be in one. Also, when it comes to sewer systems, wastewater systems, or just plain water system, I visited San Juan County, McKinley County. There are places on the Navajo Nation in the tribal areas that still have outhouses. And Paul, that's not right.
Mm-hmm.
And so these are things that my team and I would bring to the residents of New Mexico to make their lives just a little bit better. I travel from Roswell or Lovington, and I see some of the roads, and there's a lot of traffic there. We have to give credit to oil and gas because they provide almost a third of all of our income, and we need to make sure that those roads are good and safe. And so, these are the infrastructure needs that I can bring. That's one reason I want to run for governor. The second is a little bit more that it's what I refer to as a crisis in governance. And what I mean by that is this. A few weeks ago, when the governor was talking about medical malpractice reform and wanting to bring interstate compact agreements, you had three state senators that, in my opinion, have conflicts of interest. And they signaled to the governor, no, we don't want to do that. How is it that you can have three state senators usurp the will of the public, hurt people from all over this great state of ours, to having access to good doctors they're just leaving. They're leaving because they won't deal with the medical malpractice reform. There's no caps on punitive damages. Granted, yeah, if a doctor messes up, that's one thing. If a doctor keeps messing up and doesn't learn by their ways, that's another. And that's where medical malpractice punitive damages need to come in, not off the first time. So there's just a lot of things that we need to somehow get that crisis out. Because if we can't get that solved, how are we going to solve the other great issues that are plaguing the state? Lower in education and public health and all these other things that are affecting us, economic development. I mean, we just can't seem to move off the dime.
Yeah, definitely want to get to as many of those as possible. One thing, when you were mayor, of course, you were mayor during the COVID situation, the pandemic, which started in 2020. You became a voice of relative moderation on that issue, pushing back against a lot of what the governor was trying to do. Not initially, but after, say, 9 months or a year. And maybe you can put some meat on the bones in terms of exactly what you did in that regard, or your views in that regard were. But the governor was definitely among the most lockdown oriented in the entire country, and you saw things a little differently. Can you discuss that? And one additional component is, it's not in your you have a large array of things that you talk about that you want to do while governor, and we're going to talk about medical malpractice and the provider shortage and housing, et cetera. But you don't talk about the state's public emergency laws. Would you be willing to sign a bill into law reforming those public emergency laws in the state of New Mexico, so that the legislature has a seat at the table and it's not just the governor on things like COVID?
Oh, absolutely. This is the thing. When I was mayor, as I mentioned earlier about I needed to get my council members to support me, we had that. We actually, the council did give me authority to call for emergencies, but it only was good for 48 hours, which is fine. But what I'm trying to get at is, I think it's like anything else. The legislators, the Senate, the House, I'll refer to them as my board of directors, and I'll use them as such. I mean, this is something here. This is a big state, and we've got a lot of issues. We've got a lot of things that we need to accomplish, and I need each and every one of them, or at least the majority of them, granted. And so I have no problem with that. In fact, there was one time, I'll never forget, they had given me this almost what I call indefinite power for the mayor's office. And I said, listen, I need this just until my term expires. I think you don't need to give this to the future mayors, because you need to know how are they going to deal with this. I was fortunate to get pretty good support from my council members, but they knew me. They knew I wasn't going to just do something willy nilly. So I have no problem with that.
And generally speaking, what was your approach to COVID, driven by, especially as it deviated from the governor? Because you, like I said, and maybe I'm missing something, but I definitely thought you came out as a voice of relative reason in that situation when the governor was locking down businesses and locking our children out of school.
You know, one day, and first off, and you're right, in the very beginning, I mean, this was new to all of us. I never had any experience in dealing with it. All I could do was educate myself to the best of my ability. And then one day it hit me. I was in a restaurant, or I remember reading something, and they were talking about the particles in the air, and it hit me like that. It's the circulation of the restaurants, the air conditioners that was causing. So then I asked the governor, I say, hey, let the restaurants open outside. And she says, no. I go, because that would solve the problem right there. If, you can, if they want to open up, I mean, restaurants need to make money. They need to sell food. People need to eat. And I remember her just, no, it wasn't. And then, but later on, I think she relented and allowed that. But that was one example. Because I thought to myself, okay, well, if there's no air conditioning outside, let the restaurants open up. And, eventually they did. So that was good. But I guess my general take on it was this. And when that, and then I've since found out, but it turned out the reason why a lot of the elderly were falling victim more so than others is because of their immune system. And I have a good doctor. And he was telling me, okay, make sure to take these different vitamins here, and that'll boost up your immune system. And that's why, if you remember correctly, in the very beginning, little kids weren't being really affected by it because their immune system's pretty strong. And it was really the elderly that weren't. And so that was my big key. In fact, I remember calling up, we're good friends, and I hope she doesn't mind me talking about this, but I remember calling up Mrs. Domenici. I said, Miss Domenici, have you gotten your shot yet? She says, no, not yet. I go, I'm sure, I'm sure we can get this here, because, I was concerned about her. And she said, no, I'll wait my turn. I mean, I joked with her once. I said, you're like the Rose Kennedy of New Mexico. She's just a great lady. And to me, it was making sure that that our elderly population was taken care of. And that's who I was just trying to protect. So,
all right. Well, in terms of running for governor, the issue that I think jumps out as the one that you've really most identified yourself with, and seems like the critical issue facing New Mexico that you're in many ways basing your campaign upon, is the medical provider shortage issue, which is a critical issue that the Rio Grande Foundation and many others have taken up the mantle of, and really focused a great deal of attention on. And it's something that I can tell you from talking to people, as I'm sure you have as well. You've been around the state talking to people, that affects everybody in the state of New Mexico. So why don't you briefly describe how you see the problem and some of the solutions that you've called for?
So one of the things that we're probably, your listeners might be experiencing, is the wait times to see their doctor, or if they need a specialist, or their doctors leaving the state. We're not just recently we read where there's a clinic that's closing that had 8 doctors there that are doing their residency, and that's closed. That's 8 doctors we're not going to have here in New Mexico. So this is really a huge issue. We're the only state that's losing doctors. We're one of the few states that don't have caps on medical malpractice punitive damages. And so doctors, if they do something wrong accidentally, nobody's perfect, but if they do something wrong, instead of it being a more repetitive, juries are now just handing out multi-million-dollar lawsuits that aren't covered by their insurance. And so are they going to risk everything that they work for? I don't think so. So you're seeing these doctors leave New Mexico, and all it takes is just a few things from the legislature, and that is to pass the reform, even very similar to what the state of California. We talk about, or I talk about, how California has some pretty wild laws, but on medical malpractice, they have it right. I mean, granted, they're on the lower spectrum of things, but at least they have it right. And if we could at least copy what California has, I think we'd do great. So that's one thing. But then there's a few other things too. Interstate compact agreements. Mm-hmm. That's to allow doctors to be able to do telehealth. If we can remove GRT, gross receipts tax, off of medical services would be another. Also being able to match some of the states when it comes to forgiveness of loans. Last night I was with a group of doctors in Santa Fe, and one of them said they had $600,000 in debt. And the other day, last month, I was in Las Cruces talking with the Las Cruces doctors, and there was a student at the Burrell Medical School. She's from Anthony, New Mexico, which there's also an Anthony, Texas, which is literally just across the street. And she says that if she opens up her office in Anthony, Texas, Texas will forgive $300,000 of her student debt, which she has quite a bit of. New Mexico is only $75,000. So we need to at least raise that bar to equate to that of Texas. So those are just some of the few things. And then also what they call venue shopping. Mm-hmm. So when you've got I believe that if a incident happens in that city, the lawsuit should take place in that city. They shouldn't make a call to some place that's very friendly to these type of lawsuits, find a lawyer to partner up with. They move the whole venue over to that particular part of the state that's known to give multi-million-dollar settlements. That's not right. I think it needs, if a situation happens in one city, it should stay in that city instead of shopping around for areas that will give these trial lawyers more money.
So those are some good ideas in terms of the medical provider shortage. I know that your opponents in the Democratic primary, to my knowledge, Deb Haaland hasn't really said a lot about that issue. And of course, Sam Bregman is a trial attorney himself. So this seems to be an issue that you definitely have, maybe an inside track on when it comes to that relative to your opponents. Would you broadly agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. I know his campaign manager at one time used to be the director of a 501c4, which was found to raise money to actually fight against medical malpractice reform. I don't believe he's there now. I think it's one of my former counselor members who's now running that organization. Mm-hmm. And I found an old article or an old ad that Sam was, I guess, had a partner. I guess they were medical malpractice attorneys at one time. So I challenged them both to not take money from medical malpractice, from trial lawyers, associations, and to give it back. And that kind of fell on deaf ears. I had 2 newspapers who actually ran that article, and it didn't happen. So, that's all we can. That's all I can do.
Now, I realize these are more complicated issues, but before we leave the medical provider issue behind, one of the things I like to say is that doctors are people too. I know that is a pretty tautological statement, but you know, we face a lot of challenges in New Mexico, and something not in your plan is some fundamental tax reform. We have this oil and gas revenue. Yes, talk about the gross receipts tax and eliminating it for medical providers. That's a good start, but these are high earning people. New Mexico's top income tax rate at 5.9% is on the high side, certainly when you talk about our neighboring states, Texas with the zero rate, Arizona with the 2.5% rate. But it's higher than most states, and it's higher than any of our neighbors. Also, the crime issues. And I realize these, again, big issues, but they affect doctors when they're looking to come to New Mexico. Any thoughts on broader tax reform, especially the personal income tax, or crime-related issues that affect medical providers, but affect all of us as well?
Well, I'm open to listen to what the legislature wants to bring to see what we can do to incentivize doctors to relocate here to New Mexico. If it means some type of tax reform on them, I'm all for it, because granted, I believe that a lot of doctors that work and live here in New Mexico know that they might be able to get a little bit more, make a little bit more money someplace else, but you pay a little bit price to live in this great state. I mean, we have so many great things here in New Mexico that you can't money just can't buy in other states. So, but I like I said, I'm open to whatever legislature would provide me or bring to me to see what we can do to incentivize doctors to stay here in New Mexico.
All right, fair enough. So you mentioned another hot button issue in your, and again, could you give your website? I went through your website and
KenForNewMexico.com.
KenForNewMexico.com. So you do have a lot of detailed plans, and I went through this in an airsofenchantment.com post that folks can read as well, where I kind of look at your policy proposals from the foundation's perspective. Housing, which is indeed an issue, but there's a lot of government involvement in your plan as I see it. But why don't you share what your plan is with regard to housing, and then we can dive into that.
Sure. So earlier I was talking about using nonviolent prisoners as labor to partner with contractors who wish to do this. So that let's say, for example, we may have a total of 100 police officers from around different states that want to move to New Mexico. They want to move to Las Cruces, Albuquerque, Roswell, Santa Fe, Farmington, whatever may be the city. If we have these agreements in place with these contractors, then the chiefs of police or the sheriffs could tell these prospective recruits, hey, this is what your salary is, plus you qualify for a 0 down payment house, brand new 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-car garage, probably going to cost about $250,000. Payment's going to be about $1,500 a month. It's a 7% interest loan for 30 years fixed. And the only issue is you can't sell it the first 5 years because you're going to be walking in there with equity. That would be the incentive. And as we put in a few more houses around the state, you're going to see the rents drop a little bit because you're going to now increase the supply. In a nutshell, that's what my plan is. And I have it different phases. I also have it for those who may have some dependents, and they can buy a duplex or a triplex. Same issue, 0%, 0 down, 7% interest. But now it's going to help them make money. Not everyone's going to be a landlord or would want to do this, but those that do, will train them how to be a landlord. And then that'll provide some other housing for those that may need it.
So 0% down, 7% interest. This is through the State Investment Council. I have a great deal of heartburn anytime you're putting government up in a role that is, engaged with this kind of market behavior, because we, of course, saw the economic crisis of 2008, where Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which have or had, and I think they have some level of government involvement, but certainly the government involvement at the federal level back then had a big role to play in what happened. Do you think that this will make a dent? A 0% down payment is that's generous, that's favorable, but interest rates are coming down, and 7% may not be, a good interest rate for some people. So,
Yeah,
do
I'll
you think
explain
this
that.
will? Yeah, you
Yeah.
think this will be attractive?
Okay, the reason why I said 7% is because when you look at the State Investment Council's policy, it says they strive to hit 7%. Now, earlier I referred to my state legislators, reps, and senators as my board of directors. If they choose to let us do this at 6.5%, that's great. I have no problem with that. That just means the payment's going to be lower, and that's going to be a little bit less money to the state. But what I'm trying to get at is, right now their investments aren't even at 6.5%. But I'm just following what the state investment council says. So I wanted to bring that up. Thank you for bringing that up, so I could explain to you
Okay.
where I just came up with the 7%. It wasn't just pie in the sky. That's I'm trying to be palatable so that they can see what I'm talking about. In fact, I'm going to be meeting with them later this week, and so, and again, it's not. I don't want your listeners to think this is all over. Just it's going to be the new thing. These are going to be used for specific incentives to bring in police or fire, corrections officers, teachers, licensed medical professionals, and those that are enrolled tribes to work with our tribal leaders in the various 23 recognized tribes here in New Mexico. So it's just meant to help jumpstart that housing that we lack. I'm sure you've heard all the different instances where cities and counties are so far behind on types of housing. The difference that what you're referring to is that the government was backing up these mortgages. No, we're not backing them up. This is our money. So it's almost like if person A can't make the payment, okay, I'm sure there can be others who would want to buy it at that same amount, that same price, and we just take it over. So it's currently, in fact, the state invests in real estate right now, almost to the tune of $1 billion a year. A lot of people aren't aware of that, but they own housing, they own apartments, they own all these. There's a lot of investments that the state uses, but they use out-of-state companies to do this. And
Right.
this is the difference with me is we're investing in New Mexicans, and they'll actually see their tax dollars that's helping them, as opposed to going out of town, out of state.
Okay. Well, fair enough. Education's another big issue facing our state, and the latest NAEP, National Assessment of Educational Progress, scores. We were at the very bottom. That's from last cycle as well. The NAEP is generally every 2 years, but because of COVID, there was some interruptions there. But for the last 2 cycles, New Mexico's been at the very bottom in 4th grade reading, 4th grade math, 8th grade reading, and 8th grade math. What is your approach to education reform in the state of New Mexico?
So I grew up in Las Cruces, went to elementary school, middle school, high school, college. And 2 things that I want to point out that were pretty interesting. One, my dad always seemed to know when my grades were. Want to know what grades I got. And I was always amazed. I was like, well, he wasn't in the classroom. How do you know that they handed out report cards? But more importantly, every year we took like this assessment test, and it wasn't anything hard, but it gave a little snapshot of where I was or where my sister was at that particular time. So if I was in 3rd grade, I was really proud to show that maybe I was reading at a 6th grade level, or maybe my math was at a 7th grade level. And so that was something there to share with my parents. And I guess that doesn't happen right now, Paul. And I think it needs to come back. I think it needs to. It's a special tool that parents can have to know if their kids are reading at the right level or understanding math at the right level. And if they're not, we need to have people who can help the child get to that level. I think it's all about in the kids and investing in them and their ability to comprehend things. And so that's one thing. Now, throughout my life as I grew up and especially in public service, I visited places, rural places. I mean, really rural places that kids get up at 4 a.m. They work on the farm, work on the ranch. They do all their chores, and then they got to get on the bus for a 45-minute drive to school. That's a lot. And so what I'm trying to say is, I think that one size does not all fit all. I think there needs to be given more authority to the local school boards to let them decide, hey, do we really need to have Johnny go to school 5 days a week? You know, Johnny works on the farm, helps the family. Maybe as long as he meets a certain minimum requirements, maybe school for rural kids could be 3 or 4 days. I don't know. But what I'm trying to get is I would bring the best experts that I can and help them develop what's best for our students. The bottom line is they need to know how to read and write and be ready for this world that they're stepping into. And so that's important. And so it's, the other thing is this. When the internet, came on, it provided so many different opportunities and, maybe not, a lot of kids maybe don't want to go to college, but they need to learn a trade. They can learn a trade like plumbing or heating and cooling, HVAC. They get paid pretty well. And so I want to see a lot of that come back in, especially cars. When I was younger, I used to actually race cars. I used to work on my car. I could actually take a transmission out of a car. I wouldn't touch a car today. You need to literally be an engineer to work on a car. So these are trades that really need to be put back in the schools so that kids can learn and learn a good skill.
Now, what's your take on the Mississippi model? Have you studied that?
I've looked at that a little bit. It's very interesting. When I was growing up, we used to wonder where so-and-so was. And they said, they flunked him. I go, really? And they goes, yes. And so that's basically what the Mississippi's model is. They had a little bit more accountability. Instead of just pushing kids up, they would hold some kids back. And the parents did one of two things. They got upset, of course, or they got involved in their kids' education because they didn't want their child to be held back. So that, if you were to sum it up, it put a little bit more accountability on the parent, Mississippi's model, at least from what I read, is because they talked about how to kind of motivate the family, so to speak. Because really, when you get right down to it, it is. And now there are some parents who may not have that, and I have to brag about my mom and dad. My dad was taken away in 5th grade. He was put in those internment camps. His only crime was he was a Japanese American. My mom, 3rd grade education. She had to go work to help her family. But I got to stay home when I was 5 years old. I'll never forget. It was 1968, and she would call me Kenny. She goes, Kenny, she says, there's a new program called kindergarten. You don't have to go there, but you can if you want, or you can stay here. But next year you got to go to 1st grade. And bless her heart, her through her 3rd grade education, she taught me everything that she knew. When I went to 1st grade, on day 2, Paul, the teachers called my mom and said, we need to move Kenneth. Well, then it was Kenneth in school to 2nd grade. She says, no, just keep him in 1st grade. And from because I was like the teacher's helper, I would help the kids. And so, it's all about getting a good head start, and early childhood development is a big key as well. So,
how about school choice? Charter schools are one aspect of that, but what I'm really interested in is allowing people who don't think the government schools are doing a particularly good job to take their money and use it for the education that they would like. Arizona's doing this. Texas just enacted this. Utah's got it. It's really spreading across the entire country. What's your take on school choice?
Yeah, I wrote a snippet on that, and I'm willing to use a small amount to kind of do a test on that, 5 or 10% for private vouchers. I think that's what you're referring to.
Yeah, we don't use that term anymore, but that's fair.
Okay, all right. Well, that's basically in essence what it is.
Okay.
So, but again, it's all about educating our children. That's really when we get right down to it, because some could be educated. Maybe they don't want to go to an actual classroom. I remember when I was in high school, there was another place called Freedom High. Okay, they didn't have a football team, they didn't have a basketball team, but they had kids who wanted to learn, but didn't want to learn necessarily in that structured setting. And you know what? They still graduated, and a lot of them went on to college and actually are pretty successful. So what I'm trying to say is we got to focus on educating the kids. When I was mayor, I had a fitness and nutrition and education program. And I went to every third grader from 2008 to 2020. We estimate we met and took pictures with 22,000 third graders. In fact, today I still run into them. Not so much here in Albuquerque, but ironically, I ran into one in Shiprock when I was there at the parade. And it's important. I let these kids know they're our future. They're our future doctors. They're our future police officers. They're our future teachers. And I instill in them the importance. That's how I was able to get our graduation rate up, because I cared. I really did. And that's what I want to take to the governor's office. I keep thinking, I'm going to have to enlist a bunch of mayors, county commission chair people, and let them know the program that we did. It was so successful that the senators Udall and Bingaman had me recognized, and it's in the Library of Congress. We took second place in the U.S. Conference of Mayors on this program. And so, getting back to what you asked, I'd be willing to do whatever it takes to move the needle on education.
All right. We don't have much time left, so I'm going to ask you a little bit of a quicker question and then one final detailed question. Quickly, your statement of policies, your platform, if you will, has what I would call a fairly robust defense of the Second Amendment, including gun rights. Is there a sentence or two you could say about that? Just as I interpret it was very solid, but anything you want to further discuss there?
Not really. I mean, I grew up in a military family. I learned how to use weapons as a kid. I have owned several weapons myself, and used to have a carrying concealed weapons license. I just haven't renewed it. I probably, eventually will again, because I've just been kind of busy. So, but I'm
that's fine. That's great. Last thing on the list is the Energy Transition Act. You talk about addressing that, and of course, in your part of the state recently, there was a data center development kind of conversation and push called Project Jupiter that's going to be, they're going to rely on a natural gas plant that is off the grid in order to fuel that plant. And it's something that simply, I don't believe, could be done with wind and solar. Can you briefly talk about energy, especially electricity generation, and the Energy Transition Act, and how we might have to reform that in order to keep our economy going?
Right. So natural gas, I'm a supporter of. I know that some of my colleagues wanted to ban that. I think they kind of did after I left the city. I would joke with them, I have a gas stove. How am I going to warm up my tortillas? You need natural gas. It's clean fuel, in my opinion. But one of the things that I also talked about in my website is there's a lot of hot, salty water in New Mexico. It's primarily on the west side of the state. So when I was in grad school, I came up with a plan to develop using geothermal power to generate a desalination plant to desalinate the actual salty water that's running the power of the system. My professor was like, you sure there's not one like this at all? I said, I've looked. I couldn't find one. I found desalination plants. I found geothermal energy, but I've never seen geothermal used to run a desalination plant, which power to run a desal plant cost is about 60% of the whole revenue of a desalination plant. So I think between geothermal and natural gas would help with our energy sources for various businesses, whether it's these data centers like Project Jupiter or others. I'll say this real quick. We were going to get Facebook into Las Cruces, but when we met with them, they said, we need the amount of power that you currently have for the entire city. So El Paso Electric, which is our electric provider down south, said it'll take us 2 to 3 years to get that kind of power. So they up and left and went to Utah.
All right. Any last words? Reiterate your website and any kind of concluding remarks before we end this conversation.
KenforNewMexico.com. I appreciate it again very much for allowing me to be able to spend some time with you all and share with you my views. Other than I'm here to serve, I still have 7/8 of gas in the tank, and I'm here to do my best for the state, much like I did for the city of Las Cruces.
Well, thank you very much for your time. Former Las Cruces Mayor Ken Miyagishima and current candidate for the Democratic Party's nomination for governor, which will be voted on in June of 2026. And thank you for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointsnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing the show.